Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Cities, Towns, and Counties for Trails for the Great Trails State Coalition. I'm Palmer McIntyre. I'm the director of the coalition, and really excited to have a special presentation today. It's called Telling the Story with Trail Data. And data is something that's really important. We always like to try and illustrate how trails are an essential part of community infrastructure by delivering more in return than they cost to initial investment. And so we are really fortunate in North Carolina to have an amazing partner at North Carolina State University, the Institute of Transportation Research and Education, otherwise known as ITRE. And we have Steve Burt with us today, who's an economist there. And we have Jane Love, who is the community coordinator for the Carolina Thread Trail out of Charlotte. And they partnered on a very compelling economic impact study of trails in their region. So excited to bring that to you today. And we are recording this, so it will be part of our digital library on our Cities, Towns, and Counties for Trails page, so others can use this information in the future. So I'd like to turn it over to Steve and Jane, and y'all can introduce yourselves a little bit more and start your presentation. Thank you.
Great. Jane, maybe I'll let you introduce first since you're presenting first.
Yeah, as Palmer said, I'm a community coordinator here, and there are a couple of us that do that. What that really means is that we are a liaison with local government staff and also some other nonprofit partners to help advance trails. We do that by providing some grants that usually we're not paying for the whole project with our funding that we provide, but it often does provide some matching funds for partners to pursue other grants. And we provide some technical assistance, sometimes helping them maybe write grants or participating in feasibility studies to revise the alignments of trails in our network. So that's some of what we do. And I manage our data collection program, which I'm going to talk a little bit about before Steve goes into the details of the economic impact study.
And hi, everybody. I'm Steve Bird. I'm the program manager of the Economics and Policy Assessment Group at ITRE. I would say in our group, we primarily focus on economic and policy analysis, as you'd expect, but I primarily work on economic contribution and economic impact analysis, as well as benefit cost analysis. The primary distinguishers there, economic contribution, that's if you want to know for an existing trail facility, other transportation facility, what its existing impact is to the state. We consider that a contribution. If something is being built and you want to forecast forward what the impact of that would be an economic impact analysis. And then benefit cost analysis, this is a type of analysis that's often used to obtain grants, and it's to understand, do the benefits outweigh the cost, and then potentially what's that ratio of benefit to cost. So looking forward to the opportunity to share a little bit about the way we use data and how to tell a story with that. All right, Jane, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation. Okay, and then Jane, I'll just pass it off to you, and as you need me to cycle through the slide, just feel free to say next or something like that.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I think
yeah, you can go to the next one.
Yeah, my apologies. I was at the very last slide. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I know some of you know what the Thread Trail is and what we do. Just to make sure that everyone on the call knows, I'll quickly provide a little bit of background. We're a nonprofit that is advancing a regional vision for trails throughout 15 counties all around Charlotte. 4 of those counties are actually in South Carolina. So on that map, Mecklenburg and Charlotte is pretty much in the middle. The dark brown lines you see, or maybe looks black to you, those are the existing segments of the Thread Trail network, and the greenish yellow lines are the ones that are planned, or they're working through the pipeline, perhaps in design or under study. So that all adds up to more than 1,600 miles. There's still a lot to do, but over a quarter of it is existing. And now when I say trails throughout this presentation, I use that as an umbrella term these days, now that I work at the Thread Trail. In my background, I was a transportation planner, and back then I thought of I really use trail to mean like an unpaved type of facility. But for us at the Thread Trail, we say trails. We mean it can be a paved greenway, it can be a natural surface trail, it can be a water trail, which we call a blue way. We have some designated where we have put-ins and takeouts on like South Fork River, Catawba River, Rocky River, and so forth. So yeah, that's pretty much all about our network, and you can go to the next slide. So as a nonprofit, we are continually telling the story about why people should care about our vision, and having data really gives us some specifics to point to. Back in 2021, we decided to make our data collection on trails a little bit more robust than it had been. We have some data back as far as I've seen. I wasn't here at the time, but I've seen we have some on our network that's like 2014, 15, 16, but we didn't have very many pieces of equipment. So we were moving that around and not getting trends over time. So now, over the course of a year between 21 and 22, we acquired more than 20 units, and we've distributed those across our region, covering both paved trails and unpaved trails to get representation of both. So I like to, at the end of a calendar year, I like to analyze each trail. And these are some of the kind of things I look at, as you see on the screen. Average trips by month, average trips by day of the week, and then like the actual counts over the whole year. This example is from the Marshall-Cloninger Rail Trail, which is in Lincolnton. Our busiest location of the sites we monitor is in Rock Hill on the Piedmont Medical Center Trail, right there beside the Catawba River, just downriver from the Highway 21. Now, Mecklenburg County has their own count program on their greenways, so we have focused our locations outside of Mecklenburg. And I know that some greenways in Charlotte are busier than our busiest location that we're counting. You can go to the next slide. So as we have collected more and more data, we are learning more about our trails. For instance, the National Documentation Project has a worksheet that people use to extrapolate some short-term bike and ped counts into annual counts. And a step in that is a monthly adjustment factor. Their worksheet will plug in the right factor after you pick, the time, what period you're counting, and you have to pick your region, your climate. And I've always kind of wondered, like, okay, I figure we're probably a moderate climate here in the Southeast and the Piedmont, but I kind of wondered, are we really? Our summers are pretty hot, but nationally, you got to leave room for there to be a South Florida as the very hot summer. So now I can see from our trails, these are just 3 examples that across the bottom of the slide, what our monthly percentages are. And it varies depending on which trail it is. I'm sure it will continue to vary at one trail over time, a little bit at least. But you see on the far right, for instance, that one looks very different from the other ones. The Duke Kimbrell Trail, I know it has, just from being out there, I know that it has more mountain bikers on it. And so you can imagine they prefer a cooler time of year. So this is all very interesting, and it helps me, even though we have a lot of permanent counters, there still are some gaps in the data when there's a malfunction, for instance, or some vandalism. We have to take it down and get it repaired. So there'll be some missing data during the year, and I can use these factors from our own trails to help interpolate or extrapolate. Thanks. You can go to the next one. So, numbers are numbers until you really put it into some kind of message. And like I said, we are always advancing the message of why people should care about our vision. So the Thread Trail is not just about people being able to go for a walk in the woods in the afternoon. There are segments of the network that are used for commuting in the urban areas, and something that really excites me about the vision for the whole network is the potential for regional tourism, bringing visitors from outside the region to the trails. The trails themselves are the attractors. So they come in, they spend their day enjoying the natural assets of our area. And you can go to the next slide. And then in the afternoon and evening, they can enjoy the culture and character of the towns and cities that are near those trails. And they spend their money, as you'll learn from Steve. So we can go to the next slide. Before we go too far, I do want to acknowledge how key our local government partners are in making the Thread Trail a reality. You know, the Thread Trail really maintains only about 15 miles of that network, and a large part of what's designated as Thread Trail was built and is maintained by local governments and in some cases other nonprofits. So these are just two examples of a couple local governments, and in fact, these two helped fund an economic impact study along with the Thread Trail and ITRE. So they each picked a study to include among the 6 trails that were studied. Go to the next slide. So the Thread Trail, we wanted the economic impact study because even though there are other economic impact studies out there, some of them are pretty old by now, and they may have been focusing on somewhere nowhere near us, like California or New England, or even if they're in North Carolina, it might be the Outer Banks. And so we could see that people we're talking to, giving our message to, would say, well, those findings don't apply here. But now we do have an economic impact study that is recent and looks at our region, trails that are in the Carolina Thread Trail network. You can go to the next slide. And so all of this is going to help us get to making the whole vision a reality. Anybody that's in local government and or transportation knows there's never enough money to go around, and we're always having to try to get more money or keep the money that we do have. And the data we have, we use it in grant applications to get money for future trails, and we can give it to local governments to help them justify to their decision makers why their past investments were a good thing. And so they can keep on doing what they've been doing. And for instance, keep that Greenway fund in their budget and that kind of thing. Next slide. So, you know, we all know that trails are good for our state and good for our cities and towns and counties. And the data is what helps us tell that story. So I'll turn it over to Steve now. I know you're all eager to hear the details of the economic impact study.
Thank you, Jane, and I really appreciate the context that you provided. I did want to mention that if anybody has any pressing questions as they go through this, feel free to ask, but I'll try to also save time for questions for Jane and I. So hopefully at this point, many of you are aware of the trail benefits study that was completed for the Carolina Thread Trail. But if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, you can find it online by searching Carolina Thread Trail trail benefits in a Google search, and it's hosted on the Carolina Thread Trail's website. So I'll be diving into a little bit of how to tell your story with data, providing specific examples from this study. And this was completed in December of 2022, right on the cusp of 2023. There's a multitude of different types of data that could be used and different stories that you could tell with that data. What I'll be focusing on specifically are economic impacts, physical health benefits, environmental benefits, and then the data sets that go along with producing those key metrics. And before I get into the data, I did want to share a little bit about the study and its key corridors. So we evaluated 6 newly completed trail segments, including the 4 Mile Creek Greenway in Matthews, the Piedmont Medical Center Trail in Rock Hill, that's in South Carolina, the Hector H. Henry, the 2nd Greenway in Concord, South Fork Trail in McAdenville, and then the Mount Holly Riverhawk Greenway in Mount Holly, as well as the Goat Island Park and Riverlink Greenways in Cramerton. And if you were to take all those trail segments combined, they're approximately 13 miles. And if we think about this in context of the planned trail network, that's less than 1%. So the different metrics that I will be sharing with you today take into account the economic contribution and benefits of really less than 1% of the trail. So just imagine when this entire trail system were to be built out. So I'll shift gears here and begin talking about the importance of data and how it can be used to tell a story. Front and center, we have 345 businesses within a half mile of the trail. So we used geospatial data, more specifically Esri Business Analyst, which uses Data Axle and builds upon that database. The reason why this is helpful information to know, these businesses are all within a half a mile of the trail, or what would be considered within the trail shed, where people could relatively easily access these locations by foot or by bike. And what we wanted to do for this study is get a compelling set of data from trail users as well as businesses within proximity to the trail. So we actually used two trail surveys, and at the top of the screen, you'll see some qualitative data, which is from a community farmers market staff member in Matthews. And what it says is people often pair walks and bike rides on the trail with visits to the farmers market all year long. And this is just one example of the many businesses that benefited from the trail being within proximity to their storefront, or in the case of the farmers market, to where they located business once a week. And one of the other things that we wanted to determine was, are there specific types of or specific probabilities of visit based on the type of establishment within proximity to the trail. And what we found is that there was a different purchase probability. So the likelihood that somebody would stop and make an expenditure, about 2.2% if it was a retail location, 5% chance for food, beverage, and dining, 7.7% chance for a grocery and convenience store, as well as 1 out of every 200 trail users would stop at another location that fell outside of those classifications. And typically we found that trail users would spend on average about $40, but you can see that there's slight differentiation between the different business type as well. Piedmont Medical Center Trail, one of the things that was really interesting and a key finding from this trail aligns with what Jane had mentioned about trying to make a trail an attractor for tourism. So approximately 7% of the survey respondents indicated that they had come from outside of the region, and visiting the trail was very important for their decision to come to the region. So the reason why that is compelling and interesting, if we think about the trail users who stop and make a purchase, they typically spend around $40 if they do stop at a location. Meanwhile, those who come to an area, our data showed that they stopped in an area for 6.5 days, and they spent approximately $770. So if you are, as a city, town, county, able to implement a trail or a trail network that becomes a draw for tourism, it can dramatically affect your economy. And then I did also want to give a quick mention. There was really a unique context for each of the trails that we evaluated. We also looked at the Hector H. Henry II Greenway, South Fork Trail, Mount Holly Riverhawk Greenway, Goat Island Park, and Riverlink Greenways. Just a couple of quick mentions from these. There is an auto dealership, Hendrick Honda, where we happen to get both a perspective from the business as well as from a user of the trail. So one of the trail users told us they were very happy to be able to have their car be serviced, and then be able to, instead of being stuck idle, get out and use the trail while they're waiting for their car to be completed. So that provides a nice value add for a specific business. And then another trail user that we surveyed happened to be a worker at Hendrick Honda, who mentioned that she really liked to take breaks throughout the day and be able to use those breaks on the Carolina Thread Trail. So that provides a value add to employees. So it's not always the retail that a trail brings in, but sometimes it's the extra added draw for establishments or for customers at businesses as well. South Fork Trail, the Catawba Riverkeeper made a specific mention of locating, so site selection, determine their headquarter locations because of the Carolina Thread Trail trailhead marker, and also to close access to the river. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of paddling activity with the Blue Way, as well as foot traffic and bike ped traffic right at that boathouse location, which helps with the retail. Mount Holly Riverhawk Greenway, there was a specific owner that responded to our business survey. So at the Firehawk Brew Pub, there were over $1 million invested in sprucing up a specific location that was within proximity to the Mount Holly Riverhawk Greenway. It was the vision of the owner to be close to both bikers and paddlers, and also be within proximity of the downtown. And then for the Goat Island Park and Riverlink Greenway, one thing that leapt out from our business surveys, Floyd and Blackie's Coffee and Ice Cream Shop, during the time of the year, anywhere up to a quarter to half of the business's sales were attributed to trail users. So just some pretty interesting ways to think about how trail users can impact business in the local economy. One thing that is really helpful and actually very straightforward in computing, but really goes a long way to telling the story and value of a trail, are its physical health benefits. There are two primary ways to consider this. One is to look at, how important is that trail in helping people meet their weekly recommended exercise budget. So the CDC recommends 150 minutes of exercise on a given week. And one of the things we wanted to know, and what we set out in the survey doing, was tracking how many times people went to one of the Carolina Thread Trail segments that we were surveying. So how many times, and then how many minutes for each visit. And that helped us understand, okay, on average, the walk visits that the Carolina Thread Trail supports surpass the CDC recommended exercise guidelines in themselves. So even if nobody were to exercise in addition to how they use the trail, a typical trail user would meet their recommended exercise requirements for walk visits. Similar for run visits, and then bike visits, users got close, or depending on the level of their activity, if it was rigorous cycling, CDC recommends 75 minutes of rigorous cycling. So really just a tremendous supporter of and facilitator of everyday health needs. Another way to look at this is from an economic perspective. The US DOT's benefit cost analysis guidance values a bicycle trip at around $8 and a walk trip around $7. That's with the latest guidance, and those values have been updated since this study. During the time of this study, between a walk trip and a bike trip, that health benefit was had a monetized value about $7. So we can look at our total trail visits, about 558,000 among the 6 study trails, and that generates an annual healthcare savings or health benefit about $3.9 million. So pretty substantial physical health benefits from these 6 segments. One of my favorite ways to discuss and think about the benefits that trails provide are through their land preservation benefits. And a way to think about this is in that trail footprint, how much land preservation benefit are we able to quantify in terms of carbon sequestration and storage? And I'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. But what you're seeing on screen here is on the left, North Carolina and South Carolina completely covered with the National Land Cover database. This includes satellite data with a 30 meter by 30 meter resolution. If anybody attended the NCGIS conference that was held recently, you may have heard NOAA is looking to produce 1 meter by 1 meter resolution for North Carolina and South Carolina by 2026. So pretty exciting. We'll even have better precision and granularity in these types of analyses. And then the image on the right shows the trail footprint and the land cover class that you see in the footprint. I am going to take a quick pause. I noticed a couple things coming up in the chat and just want to see if there's any relevant questions here. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to keep going. And if anybody has a specific question, please feel free to unmute, or I'll save time at the end. So thinking about our land cover and what we would like to do and what we did for this study is marry that to the European Environmental Agency's terrestrial and marine carbon stock and sequestration rates. So that way we can understand for a specific type of land cover, how much carbon are we seeing sequestered, and then how much is in that habitat stock. And the difference is when we talk about carbon stock, if you look at the habitat pool or the specific area of interest, how much carbon is currently stored in the vegetation, in the water, in the soil, within that habitat, how much carbon is being stored. And then sequestration is more of an active measure. Over a specified duration of time, on net, how much carbon is either being released into the environment or how much carbon is being pulled in and then sequestered as part of that carbon stock. So we wanted to know over the course of a year how much carbon is being sequestered as well as that carbon stock. And that helped us tabulate. So we found that there was an estimated 26,800 metric tons of carbon being stored in that habitat pool, as well as 559.5 metric tons being sequestered on an annual basis. And that relates to an annual emissions savings of about 1.45 million. And then please bear in mind that this to most agencies would be considered a conservative estimate. We used USDOT benefit cost analysis, social cost of carbon for the metric ton appraisal value. Other nations have much higher values of carbon, the social cost of carbon. So we at ITRE have to follow, as an institute, we follow USDOT guidelines, but I just did want to call that out because this is a very conservative metric. Vehicle miles traveled. Another way that we can look at emissions benefits is to think about how the trail itself allows people to either walk and bike or perform some other non-motorized form of transportation instead of using a vehicle, or to travel lesser distances with a vehicle. And let me start first with the lesser distances. We found that a lot of people, when we surveyed them, we asked where would they go if the trail were not available, and how would they get there. So what we found is a lot of people did actually drive to their trails, but if the trail weren't available, they would have to drive further to get to either another trail or gym, with most trip purposes being recreation in our study purposes. However, we also found that a fair number of car trips were eliminated as well. So we found that there were about 104,000 eliminated car trips and about 227,000 reduced mileage car trips. And I think I forgot to mention, but for the reduced mileage car trips, we were finding that people on average would travel about 20% further in the absence of a trail. So all that led to about 1.57 million vehicle miles eliminated, or about 90,000 in emissions cost savings. When we think about how we want to share key data, often how we message or the key outputs that we give are very important to who's digesting that. So the top four measures here: employment, labor income, economic output, and tax revenue. These are your traditional economic impact measures. If you conduct an economic contribution analysis or an economic impact analysis, the way that you link indirect and induced effects, the model itself offers the opportunity to look at employment, labor income, output, and revenue. Employment and labor income, those are relatively straightforward. How many jobs are supported and what are the earnings supported by those people that are employed? Economic output, this would be your total sales revenue that you gain throughout a specified period of time. And then tax revenue, we aggregated this, but it would you could potentially look at local, statewide, and national tax revenues, or local, state, and federal. The bottom three, healthcare savings, vehicle emissions reduction benefit, and carbon storage and sequestration. These are benefits that the trails provide. So these may not necessarily contribute to the state's economy, but they contribute to the welfare of individual trail users. And there's a monetized benefit of that increase in welfare. You can look at the way that these impacts or benefits accrue either across all 6 study trails in the left column, or as a range from the lowest to highest in the right column. And then sometimes it's helpful to just know on average. So on average, every trail mile that we studied supported 15 total jobs. That includes direct, indirect, and induced. The way that you present your data also can be valuable to stakeholders. And then after the Carolina Thread Trail study was completed, we have become more familiar and have started to use at ITRE AI, cell phone aggregation data. This is Placer AI. And what is helpful here is we're able to understand through cell phone data where people visit directly before and directly after they make a trip to the trail. So it offers a little bit more power and granularity for the economic impact analysis. And that's really just because if we think about the total availability and also the cost associated with trail intercept survey, in a study that's well funded, such as the Carolina Thread Trail study, you can have a team go out 2 to 3 weekends and understand how people are using the trail, where they're making expenditures, and how much they're expending with trail intercept surveys. However, those costs wouldn't be feasible over the course of a year. But by using cell phone data, we can understand users' behavior over the course of a year, over the course of a couple of years. So this is a really nice new data offering to understand where people are going before and after they visit a trail. And then we can take the output. This would be Placer AI's CSV output. So you can see the type of category where people are going before and after. And then you can take that and you can pair it with data Axle and understand what is the total sales that a venue makes over the course of a year. And then specifically for those visits related, or the percentage of trail visits that accrued based on a bicycle or pedestrian visit, you can estimate that trail related sales. So one way to do this, we looked at Placer data and we saw that there were 1,777 trail related visits to Floyd Blackie's ice cream. That equates to about 5.9% of that establishment's total visits, so annual visits of 30,200. Its total sales over the course of a year were 344,000. If we were to assume that the amount people spent on the trail were equivalent to those in store, we would see that trail related sales were about $20,250. And similarly, here's an example from Mayworth. So we can take that for every establishment and start to get a better or more granular picture of how people are visiting locations after the trail and how much they're spending. So with all that in mind, spoken with Jane, spoken with Palmer, and also Iona Thomas and others about how do we take the data that we have through the Carolina Thread Trail study through Placer and other sources and use it so that economic impact analysis can become accessible to key stakeholders throughout the state. And I saw Joe Furstenberg on this call, so I'm very happy that he's here. Thanks to North Carolina Department of Transportation, Integrated Mobility Division, him as well as others who had interest in this upcoming research. This project is looking to launch this August. It's NCDOT project 2026-02, and it's developing a publicly available trail benefits tool for North Carolina. The idea would be there'd be a long, or a fairly robust period of literature and data review in which our economic model, we could extract the indirect and induced multipliers to get the direct, indirect, and induced effects of sales revenue. We'd have Placer AI to help us understand where people are going before and after visiting a trail, Data Axle to understand trail expenditures, other literature such as what Jane mentioned for trail counting earlier in the slide to get an understanding of some of the key trail context for each and every trail, to help build in an Excel tool that would be plug and play. You could basically, if you had the data as a user, you could put as refined sales data as needed. And if you didn't, which would be the anticipated case, we would have a lot of back-end data to support estimated expenditures at specific locations. So the economic impact analysis module would be one part of this research. And the goal of this would be for trails of all types. Jane had mentioned not only just trails that are out in nature, but also your everyday commute trails. So we're envisioning in an urban, a suburban, and a rural context for all the trails that could be computed and their economic analysis could be conducted, as well as a benefit cost analysis module. So the purpose of this would be to help with grants that require a benefit cost analysis, such as RAISE grants. This module would help tabulate that portion of the grant requirement, but it could also be used to talk about the benefits that a trail provides as well. If you remember back to the one slide I mentioned, there's economic contribution and economic impact metrics, as well as benefits that may not contribute to the economy, but support the welfare of trail users. Case studies, there's been a lot of interest from the Akusta Trail as a key stakeholder, and then probably looking to look at 3 other key trails based on some of the key feasibility studies that NCDOT has undertaken. I think the most important part of this study will be, once everything has been compiled, being able to provide user guidance so that all of our key stakeholders could readily use the tool and help tell the trail story. And then more importantly, research dissemination, making sure that the tool is widely available and used. So that's really what we're looking at for the future and where we're going with this work plan. I did mention a little bit about this before, but with a little bit more depth, we're looking at taking the GIS polyline files or the trail alignment for the Carolina Thread Trail, Piedmont Land Conservancy, and those available within the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure network. Taking a sample of those segments, tying those into expenditure data where we have businesses that are within proximity to those trails, then using Placer to see where people are going before and after visiting those trails and tying that to Data Axle. Then we anticipate using our North American Industry Classification System codes, also known as NAICS codes, that are within the Data Axle data set, to properly link those with in-plan codes so that we can get our direct, indirect, and induced effects. So it's a little bit technical, but these are some of the keys that we can use to unlock how we can see where people are going to make expenditures and then use those expenditures to model the full economic impact of the trail. And then for our benefit cost analysis module, we'll be honing in on vehicle cost savings, physical health benefits, and environmental benefits that trails provide. And I did want to mention that there is a huge part being played by Jane Love, our presenter here today from the Carolina Thread Trail, Palmer McIntyre, who's hosting this, and then Iona Thomas from McAdams, and also the Great Trail State Coalition. The goal would be once we have the EIA, or the economic impact analysis, and the benefit cost analysis module complete, to make sure that it's being used so that key trail stakeholders and advocates throughout the state can not only better discuss the impact of their trails on the economy, but also could potentially have greater success in securing grants to help fund that trail network as well. And again, a big thanks to the NCDOT Integrated Mobility Division for being an advocate for this research. That's really all I have in store, and I think we'd love to take questions for anybody that has them. And maybe Palmer, I'll pass it back to you if you have anything else that you'd want to say related to this.
Thank you, Steve and Jane, so much. That was, it's fascinating. I've heard that presentation before, and I feel like I learn something every time I hear it. And this data is so valuable as we work with our elected leaders to advocate for investment in trail infrastructure. So at the state level, but also with our local governments. I did hear a stat last week that said that for conservation, so that's not recreation dollars, but in conservation dollars, 51% of those dollars come from the local government compared to state and federal. So local, there's a real opportunity here for local investment. So thank you for sharing this, and thank you for the work you're doing to build even more tools that we can all access in the future. And would love to open the floor to questions. I have one question that maybe while others are thinking of some questions. So on your maps earlier, where the little dots are within the half-mile trail shed, sort of wondering, like, did you assess at all to what extent, what came first, the business or the trail, vice versa? Because I know in Greensboro, the downtown Greenway, which is an urban loop, a 4-mile urban loop around our downtown, they track investment in downtown development, and it shows that the trail, the presence of the trail, the plan of the trail has actually generated a certain level of economic development. So I'm just wondering if any of those businesses within that trail shed kind of popped up after the trail was there.
Question, and I really like tracking that. I would say we didn't do it intentionally, but throughout the study, we found, especially for the Mount Holly Riverhawk Greenway, there were specific businesses that weren't in, like the Riverhawk Brew Pub were making investments based on speculation of the trail being built. Like we really want to locate here. We think this is going to be very good for business, and that was their key driver of opening up shop. So I think that it's a great idea, and maybe site selection could have been something that would have been really neat to track. And what you mentioned makes me think of the Atlanta Beltline as well, just thinking about how many businesses have come into being as a result of that investment. So anyway, great question. We didn't look at it specifically, but we learned throughout the study that there were several businesses that specifically located due to the existence of a trail.
Well, if there are questions, just take yourself off mute. We're a small crowd here, very friendly crowd. So you can just jump in and ask your question. I've got another question. What does it take to work with ITRE? Say, I'd love to replicate this model in my region. Our region is very different from Charlotte. Every region's different in our state, and what makes everything so interesting. But what does it take to work with ITRE on a project like this?
I think not much at all. Like we'd really love to take as much input as we could, because I think it would help strengthen the study. So if anybody had a trail that they were specifically passionate about, or it was just something that was under their purview and wanted to make sure it was accounted for. If you have GIS files, great, we could use those and then conduct the analysis. If not, we could probably create them. But I think our goal, Palmer, is to try to be able to create an economic impact analysis tool that is flexible enough to work for every context, every trail context throughout the state. So the reason why we're doing the case studies is to make sure, yes, our models are calibrated correctly and we're able to account for differences. And it would be nice. We'd really love to hear from people that have trails they're interested in, so that we could make sure our results are meaningful. So a phone call and email, that's about all it takes, because I know we'd be really excited to make sure that what we're finding aligns with expectations of those who are interested. And then just as a little bit more information, this study is planned to kick off in August. So before then's fine, to build context and awareness, or but just wanted to say the sooner the better. And it's not an instance where, oh, sorry, you've missed the truck. No, there's really a good amount of time for those that are interested.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just from the audience, do you all have trails that you feel like are real economic engines in your area? If so, tell us about them. Like what trail and what makes it an economic engine? And I know Lindsay has an example.
Yeah, I think for us, Palmer, like we have a really extensive Blueway trail. So we have several, but usually our rivers are our main driver as far as tourism goes, especially coming up here in the spring, summer months. So we have the Dam River State Trail, and which has numerous access points along there. And then we also have, so our paddle trails are really, really large. And then we also have hiking trails and some pretty significant ones, and some, like the Chinquapin Trail, which is well known, and things like that. But I would say for us, it'd be like data like this is always super helpful, because it's like, all right, where are these people coming from, that come out? Are they, whether they're river tubing or kayaking or fishing or what have you, it'd be really helpful. But that's something we're always looking at, and it's hard to track. And then with 2 state parks as well, we have a lot of folks coming in at different parts, whether they're on the river in the state parks or they're hiking and things like that.
And your mountain bike park has some economic impact too.
So yeah, we talked about that briefly in the beginning. So with Ferris Park in coming in and bringing in races, with the mountain bike trails there, with these NICA bike races, but also I think Body Armor State Games is going to have an event up there. And to say something about that, as far as like NICA, all of those racers coming in are all from outside Rockingham County. So which is kind of crazy. So that is strictly just one big visitor draw, which is fantastic. And I think Shell mentioned this, they're coming in twice this year and for April. And so and NICA is really great about giving us some kind of an economic impact report and being able to track it on their end. But no, I think that's Ferris Park in itself, just with those trails. That's why it's, super important that we continue to maintain those trails, and if we can add to them in the future, and things like that.
And that economic impact comes partly from people being aware what the opportunities are in the area. I know for a while, Hanging Rock State Park was tracking people visiting. People would come in with their picnic lunches and they would go straight home, and they wouldn't stop in any of the towns. And so it all kind of ties together. All the partners need to work together. That's a great example of that. So there's a couple of notes in the chat. Jason was talking about Panthertown Valley, which is a beautiful area in southwestern North Carolina. And sounds like, Jason, you haven't done an economic analysis, but you're interested in assessing that more.
I was just going to say, Palmer, I'm copying these notes from the chat and making sure that I follow up to this. Yeah, this is great. Thanks for reading this out.
Yeah. And then the paddle trails. I mean, right. Paddle trails are very much a part of the trail ecosystem. And I know that wasn't part of your analysis. that you did for the thread trail?
We mentioned, I guess, the South Fork Trail, we looked at paddlers because of the Catawba Riverkeeper and how many paddlers they would get out on a daily basis, whether they were through corporate events or family members that were just interested in going. So honestly, the South Fork Trail, a lot of their impact did come from paddlers. So
Okay.
it is something that even though it was unique to that trail out of the 6, it was something we captured. And I think to Lindsay's point, it would be really nice to capture Blue Way impact as well, and something that would be valuable, especially physical health and economic impact could be definitely 2 metrics that could be readily straightforward to capture. Good point, Palmer.
My perspective is probably on the opposite side of the spectrum from what most are on this call, but so I work for the North Carolina Interscholastic Cycling League. And for me, I'd be really interested to connect with you, Steve, to see how we can optimize like the data that we are collecting on economic impact data, so that we can be providing the most helpful information to folks that reach out to us and would like us to hold an event, or are trying to form teams and advocate for those trails in their area, because I get a lot of communications about that. And sometimes I'm just kind of hit or miss in what I'm providing. So I'd love to be able to make sure the information that we're collecting and providing is the most impactful it can be to support those efforts locally.
Absolutely. And I would say, I'm pretty good with the economic impact analysis and have a nice understanding of what generally sounds well in the policy arena, but I would say really Palmer, Iona, Jane, they would know the communication aspect and would be stronger with that than I would, but we're working as a team. So if you reach out to me, I'll make sure we bring it back to the team, or just wanted to give you a heads up relative to that. But I think that's a very valuable thought, and let's make sure that the data that we have access to is being communicated in a way that can be most valuable. So thank you, Charles. Good comment.
Perfect. Thanks.
And that's the difference between concentrated events versus sort of everyday traffic. So yeah, you have those big jumps where you have those big events like what Shell does with their races. Oh, this has been super informative. Are there any other comments or questions? Well, all of this data is really going to help us become the great trail state, which North Carolina is. Thanks again for your time today. Thank you, Jane and Steve, for sharing your data with us, and we look forward to working with you more.
Thank you, Palmer. Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure.